Hello everyone, we're back with another video and today we're going to be talking about maintenance and kind of just things to check on your car like between race meetings, things that are going to wear out, go bad and are going to make your car handle worse over time. So the first one is going to be the diff. So whether you have a gear diff or a ball diff, no matter what you've got, the diff is going to be something which needs to be maintained. So to start with, let's think about gear diff. So obviously there's three in the four-wheel drive if you run a centre diff, and you've got one in the back of the two-wheel drive as well if you're running a gear diff. So what goes wrong with a gear diff? What can go wrong with a gear diff? Well, sometimes they lose oil. That's a thing that can happen. So obviously every, I'd say, 2-3 meetings you do, you should really check for oil. We check probably every meeting really to check that the diff's full, but yeah, just ever so often, just make sure that that diff's actually like not full, obviously, filled to the right point, but not empty because they do lose oil through time. Another thing with the diffs is obviously they do have the O-rings in as well, and they wear out after a bit of time, and they can then start to leak or expand and cause it to feel tighter and things like that. So we don't change them all the time, really, but we probably wouldn't do longer than like half a season, like half a winter or summer season on one. We'd probably do like two sets of O-rings in the diff for like a winter season or something like that. So that's kind of the diff for a gear diff. Then if you're thinking about a ball diff, the ball diff is kind of a funny one where it feels smooth when you build it, and then kind of depending how well you built it and how well you run it in and what surface you're running on, it varies a hell of a lot to when that ball diff is worn out. But kind of the way that you tell is you feel it and it just feels all crunchy. It's not smooth anymore. You can hear it kind of making a racket as you turn the wheel. And yeah, at that point, that's kind of when you got to change your ball. If there's no real set answer as to when you've got to change it. It's just when it gets to a point where it doesn't feel good and smooth anymore, that's really when you should change it. And obviously that point's going to be different depending what level you're at and how good you want your car to be. But yeah, that's kind of where it gets to with the ball diff. So moving on from the diff, we've got the out drives. So obviously the out drives coming out of the diff. So those, obviously when they're new, they've got two nice straight flat edges. But when you've used them for a while, those edges become not flat anymore. So they can get almost like a big U in where the drive shaft works. And that what that does is basically as you get on throttle, that can kind of cause the drive shaft to lock in place, and it makes the rear end very stiff as you're on throttle. And in some scenarios, a little bit of wear there can help on like dirt and things like that, where you really need drive shaft bind and you need more traction. But if you get to a point where there is a proper dip in the outdrive, you're going to have to change it no matter what surface you're on. With the Astro and carpet, we find probably new is better because it can be very bumpy outdoors on the Astro, and obviously it makes it worse over the bumps on throttle when that drive shaft's locking in there. And then on carpet, it doesn't allow the rear end to roll as much when you're on throttle and to have as much on power steering. So we kind of try and keep the outdrives very good in the diff on two-wheel drive, and it's the same thing for four-wheel drive as well. We try and keep them good. So as soon as you kind of get a bit of a curvature in that outdrive, you really want to be changing it. The next one is the drive shafts. Now, there's quite a few parts to the drive shaft that wear out, obviously. So you've got the main pin which goes into the outdrive we've just been talking about, and then you've got the smaller pin and the barrel through the joint. Now, the smaller pin and the barrel, it's mainly the little pin that you need to look out for there. Usually, the very ends of that small pin in that joint there, that is going to wear out those small ends, and what that gives you is a bit of play in the drive shaft. And obviously that's only a small pin, so if it gets too worn out, it could break as well. So that's something to watch out for. When that pin isn't, square anymore, it's got sort of big steps in it. You can see where it is, like on the two very ends, it will kind of have a step like that, and it will just be a smaller diameter on the ends. That is really when we would change that pin. The barrel lasts a bit longer, but with Associated, you can buy the pin and barrel set, which we'll put on the screen. So pretty much when the pin gets worn out, we just have that pin and barrel. I think maybe it's like a CVD rebuild kit or something, and we just change the pin and barrel together, and have basically a new joint in there. The actual end of the drive shaft on this end where the joint is lasts quite a while, so you don't really need to worry about that. The pin in the other end will be worn out quicker than that. So the pin that's actually in the out drive, that obviously gets a bit of a flat on it as well, where it's been working in the out drive. That's not as bad as having the dip in the out drive I was talking about, but it is still something where if that gets properly flatted off and it's really, not round at all anymore, it's just a flat surface, that's really when you need to go ahead and change the whole dog bone itself. So that's really what to watch out for with the drive shaft. Okay, the next thing is the bearings. So again, bearings kind of depends what conditions you're running your car in as to how long the bearings are going to last. So obviously if you're running them in the wet or you're running them on like a very dusty dirt or something, you're going to have bigger problems with your bearings than you are if you're running on carpet where there's basically no dirt or debris at all. So again, the thing with the bearings is you kind of just need to check that they don't feel like lumpy or they're locking up in any way. You just want them to feel smooth. And obviously a way you can make your bearings last longer is if you use like a bearing oil or something. We use ZX1, which is just like it's kind of just like a metal to metal lubricant, I think, that just works in the bearings and just helps keep them a little bit freer. Now the main bearings to watch out for are usually the hub bearings, I would say, in 4-wheel drive and 2-wheel drive, especially the rear of 2-wheel drive and then all round in 4-wheel drive. Just the hub bearings seem to wear out the fastest and get the most dirt in them, probably because of where they are and sort of how much force is on them. But yeah, they're the main ones to watch out for, I would say. Everything else is usually okay. Maybe the diff bearings as well, actually. But yeah, that's the main ones to watch out for. So after the bearings, we've got hinge pins. So a few things with the hinge pins. Again, if you're running them in the wet or kind of like moist conditions, they can kind of get a bit of a rust on them on the surface. And that obviously just makes them a bit harder to pivot in the arm and it's going to lock the suspension up a little bit more. So if you see that orange rust on your hinge pins, we use Mother's Car Polish, just a brand of like polish basically for metal that we put the hinge pins in. We just put them in the Dremel, or you can even just have them in your hands, put a bit of polish on them and just polish them up in the some like rag or something like that, and that usually just takes the rust off them. So that's how you sort that problem out. The other thing with the hinge pins is they can bend, usually not the inside ones because they're 3.5mm and they're pretty good, but sometimes we've had the front one on the 2-wheel drive bend on the inside because it's only a 3mm one, so that's one to watch out for with the bending hinge pins. But usually that's not an issue, to be honest, but it's just something to check while they're out as well. So the next one is ball cups and ball studs. Now, obviously, they can get a bit of dirt in them, which then seems to cause them to wear out faster as well. So the thing with them is you usually just kind of need to check that they haven't like gone all tight and grainy. If they have, you can just pop them off and clean them out or whatever, something like that. Now, the other thing with the ball studs is sometimes the ball studs can bend. If you say have like 4 or 5mm under the rear one, if you're not running the factory team +2 mount or whatever and you've got a lot of spaces under there, it can bend, it can make that ball stud bend on the back there. So just check like when you're winding it in and out that it's not like making your screwdriver go around like this. So the next part is the shocks. So the main things that we look out for with the shocks is pretty much just the X-rings that are in there. So once they've been in there for about a month, they seem to expand with the oil. And what that does is obviously just lock the shaft in there a little bit more, and it just makes the shock harder to move in and out. And obviously that's just not going to help the handling of your car. So pretty much every month we just change the X-rings in the shocks. So say it's in the summer, before every national, put new X-rings in the shocks. That's how we do it. The other thing with the shocks is the standoffs at the top. Again, if you're running in very sort of dirty, dusty conditions, what can happen is you can get quite a bit of grit in between the shock cap and the standoff. And that grit almost just turns into a grinding paste and it can just wear away that blue shock standoff there. And what happens then is you get a lot of play between the shock cap and the standoff, and your whole shock can kind of just start like, when it's going from rebound to compression, quickly it just starts like floating around on there instead of being tight and just working the shock itself. So check if they have too much wear on them, a great big flat spot on one side where it's been grinded away. Just make sure that they're staying good, because that can change the performance quite a bit. Okay, that's it for today. Hopefully that's helped you sort of know what to check on your car between meetings to see what's wearing and tearing. We'll try and upload a bit more regularly than we have been recently. I know it's been quite a while since the last one, but yeah, thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one.